Welcome back to Taiwan versus the world. Today we will talk with two guests about the Manila Dialogue. The forum took place in Manila last month and gathered academics and analysts from around the world to discuss the tensions in the South China Sea. As a reminder, several neighboring countries are disputing the many islands in the area. China is the main actor, claiming them all under the infamous Nine-Dash Line and having considerably militarized the islands under its control. To discuss what happened, we'll talk with Sasha Chhabra and Benjamin Blandin. We'll then listen to a feature in which two consultants give us their opinions on the situation around rare earth and what Taiwan can do to minimize the impact of the US-China rivalry on this issue. Thanks again for listening. So today with me are Sasha Chhabra and Benjamin Blandin. If I may ask you to introduce yourself. Sasha, can you tell us about yourself?
Sure. I'm Sasha Chhabra. I'm currently a visiting research fellow at Taiwan's Institute for National Defense and Security Research, and I look at Taiwan's strategic diplomacy and the communication with the countries that matter most to its security, which I view as first and foremost the United States, but close behind that we have both Japan and the Philippines.
Well, I'm Benjamin Blandin. I'm a French citizen, and I will do the Taiwan Fellowship next year at INDSR in Taiwan. And before that, I've worked for a number of years as a senior consultant in strategy and innovation for firms like Accenture, Deloitte, Capgemini. More recently for Airbus Defence and Space. And for over the past 3 years, I've conducted with success a PhD in geopolitics, finance, whose focus was Chinese asymmetric warfare along the first island chain.
Thank you. And I believe you were both at the Manila Dialogue. So just as a starter, let's keep it open and broad. What was your impression?
My overriding takeaway from this was how China has very successfully aligned most of ASEAN and South China Sea region against it and against the very aggressive postures it's taken. I think the Filipinos have done a very good job with transparency, with broadcasting just the level of violence that's going on against their fishermen, against their Coast Guard, by highly aggressive Chinese naval and Coast Guard ships that are very, very far away from China and just off the coast of the Philippines. And they're really showing the world the results of China's muscular and I would say imperialist and aggressive foreign policy. What we're seeing now is nations that like Vietnam that are traditionally quite close to China, despite being skeptical of it, are taking even a more muscular approach now as well. And we see that with the recent news about all the island building they're doing as well to show up their positions.
Personally, I was amazed by one thing, that in just 2 years, Jeffrey or Daniel has been able to build this event and to make it an important milestone in the year after the Vietnamese event in Da Nang and before the one in Kuala Lumpur. So that in itself was quite an accomplishment. Overall, in terms of how the sessions happen one after another, the topics addressed, the type of expert that are here, it's fairly comparable. There's a certain freedom of expression. People are free to speak their mind, but it's not exceptional. Vietnam has evolved the past few to also offer quite a freedom of expression, and but yeah, overall it's rather a standard event.
To me, I think one of the most amazing parts of this is that the Chinese show up themselves too, and also so do the Taiwanese. So you have everyone together in one room, and the Chinese are there arguing their absurd positions, claiming all of the sea. But importantly, they're there and they're taking a verbal beating. And you could see universally, everyone, with the exception of perhaps the Malaysians, was quite consistent in condemnation of China's positions. Most of the other states are willing to take a collaborative, multilateral approach to the region. But with China, it's really my way or the highway approach to the South China Sea. And we know that's not very popular in most of the world.
So indeed, observing a bit what was happening from a distance, this is definitely what I wanted to discuss, the impression that all countries are now ganging up on China on this, that China successfully alienated everyone. But before we enter that, you just said something that I'd like to explore a bit more. You said maybe not the Malaysians or something like that. So can you tell me a bit more about that? What made the Malaysian attitude different and why?
Yeah, I'll just say something quickly, and then since Benjamin's based in Malaysia, I'm sure he has quite a lot to say. But just from my own experiences interacting in the dialogue with the delegates, and one of the roundtables, I did have a back and forth with the Malaysian National Security Advisor, who said, quite plainly, he doesn't view Xi Jinping as a bully, and the South China Sea is not a big concern for their relations with China. They're more focused on getting rich. And my point to that is that may be true today, that it's not a big focus for you and China is not bullying you, but that's because the Philippines is taking the brunt right now of the aggression. And if the Philippines are unable to defend their interests, if the world doesn't help protect freedom of navigation and contest China's expansion of claims in the South China Sea, Malaysia is going to have to deal with this problem too. It might change from being 5% of their portfolio to 50% of their portfolio now with China. And Xi Jinping might turn out to be a bully because, to much of the world, he is viewed as a bully, and including within China as well. People know that he's a bully. Isn't a guy who's trying to compromise. This isn't someone who's trying to uphold international norms and values. So the Malaysians may be focused right now just on getting rich, but I think sooner or later they will realize that I understand they don't want to live in a US run world, but I don't think they want to live in a Chinese run world either. Eventually, every country is going to have to deal with China individually if we don't deal with the challenge collectively.
Yes, I'll draw a comparison between Malaysia, Philippines, and Vietnam. In Vietnam, they have been subjected to almost 50% of all interactions, and I mean accidents, with China from 2010 to 2020, including those two massive incidents in 2014 and 2019, where they resisted really forcefully, which forced China to back down. The Philippines now, who used to be only 25% of those incidents, now is almost 60%. So it's really almost tripled, and they're facing of everything that's happening, and they are less impacted or because Vietnam was I mean the incident who took place in Vanguard Bank could have been critical for the resources of the government, and it would have created a lot of trouble in the country if they impeached China to settle there. In the Philippines, Reed Bank is the only place where they could eventually start new capacities, but they don't yet exist. In Malaysia, those facilities they exist, and they are very much vital as well for the government's income. They have not demonstrated the same level of readiness than the Vietnamese, but they have not also been facing that much grave incidents as well. So Malaysia tried to or decided to take another path than Vietnam, which is okay, let's discuss, let's underplay some of the tension and disputes, and let's find other ways to accommodate with the Chinese. So, for example, Chinese companies have received a very large infrastructure project in Malaysia. And in the meantime, they maintain boats at Gem Shoal and Luconia Shoals. But every single day these boats do radio challenge and make the tour of the oil and gas facilities while not impeaching the activity of this complex. So you see that each country can have its own strategy.
I see. So now let's circle back to Vietnam, where we just said Vietnam has kind of changed its posture. Are we able to identify the turning point? Because conflicts in the South China Sea has been going on forever, and yet it is only this year that we observe Vietnam changing its posture, and most of the countries in the region also, as we said, aligning a bit on the Philippines. So, what exactly happened that finally made them change their stance?
For a very long time, Southeast Asian countries were very afraid of being seen by China as ganging up against it, and any form of cooperation or data sharing or joint exercises, joint patrols, everything was seen as too provocative against China. So now there's first of all the disputes have arisen in this Bradleys for everyone to see in 1988. So it's already quite some time ago, almost 50 years. And that's one point. The second point is that for some countries, it took a long time to realize that no matter how nice, how accommodating, how understanding, how soft-spoken we are toward China, we are rarely paid in return. the second point. And the third one is that the discussions initiated in the second half of the 1990s, who paved the way for the declaration of conduct and the negotiation on a code of conduct, have literally gone almost nowhere in 25 years. So some countries are maybe they're not out of patience, but they want to try something different.
I'm not an expert on Vietnam, but I'm aware, over the years it has shifted back and forth, right? There have been quite a few kinetic incidents, including, resulting in the deaths of dozens of Vietnamese soldiers, both from North and South, right, over the decades, with regards to China. And let's not forget that China's last full-blown war was against Vietnam in the 70s. So, there's a long, long history when it comes to China and Vietnam on all fronts. And I think, whenever someone visits Vietnam, they always remind you that, they fought the Americans for 10 years, the French for 50, and the Chinese for 1,000. So even though at times they're getting quite close to the Chinese, particularly economically, the security relationship moves up and down. So I think we are seeing a period here where they are certainly concerned about their own position, but maybe they also view themselves as having some freedom to get a little more assertive because China is very focused on the Philippines, and there's a lot of support coming for the Philippines from the US and from other states. So they're maybe viewing that other countries aren't going to object to their island building. They're not going to view, Vietnamese militarization in the South China Sea as an aggressive action, but rather as a defensive action because it's being viewed defensively. Once upon a time, Vietnamese militarization area was viewed a little more aggressively, and you can look at how the Taiwanese built up increased artillery on Taiping Dao or Itu Aba, which is the largest feature in the South China Sea and is controlled by Taiwan. At times there were concerns not just that the Chinese would take it, but actually that the Vietnamese might be able to threaten it. So there was a little arms race several decades ago there. What we're seeing now is there's not a view from the other claimant states that Vietnam is going to be aggressive there. So maybe they're viewing this as a good opportunity to increase their defensive position.
And I think it's interesting to see that even in Vietnam, at the South China Sea Conference in Da Nang, there was a rather surprising freedom of tone and speech from all experts. So that clearly was a point that I personally noticed because I was there. And at the Manila Dialogue, I wouldn't say there was a change between the first year, last year, and this year. It was pretty much open in terms of tone. But what remains consistent is the fact that China, or at least the representatives of China, they are adamant in refusing any form of responsibility and always shift the blame to Southeast Asian countries or what they call exterior forces.
So, Benjamin, that's actually interesting what you are saying is that China itself absolutely does not change at all, pretty much. Since you had the opportunity also to be
absolutely
at the
nothing.
dialogue last time, and you say that they are the ones who absolutely do not change.
Well, you have to imagine that 3 years ago at the 2023 Maritime Security Conference in Singapore, we had these expert Hubo and Jubo that we see at pretty much all the conferences who dared to say in public in front of the entire audience, "Oh, but you have it all wrong. It's actually us being victimized by the Philippines because in that year, and that year, Filipino Coast Guard shot at fishermen, and in at least one occasion, one died out of the wound." So, I mean, for a country that behaves so brazenly as China does, to then portray itself as a victim of a developing country is quite hard to hear.
Yeah, I turn off my microphone when you are speaking, which is good because I actually burst in laughter when you said that. I imagine that it may have been maybe the reaction in the audience. They may have think like, are we at a stand-up comedy show or something like this? It's quite ridiculous to imagine China feeling like a victim in front of the
Absolutely.
Philippines.
I mean, everybody was in disbelief. And you had a researcher called Renato de Castro who bursted in the room. If you are a serious, professional, seasoned expert, you would never even try or think to try of producing and deploying such fallacies to the whole world. But they don't care. They just don't care. They know that we know it's false, but they keep doing it.
I think what Benjamin is getting to here is the truth about the Chinese position, which is the alignment of the political position and the so-called academic position. People will show up at these conferences and they say that they're researchers or academics, track two type individuals. But there's no difference in a party state like China. They're there to assert a political claim. They're not there for discussion. They're not there for open interaction, trying to understand what actually is the history, what is actually an equitable solution here. What does international law say? And it's simply put, China wants it. China will take it if it can. I'll say that one thing struck me based on my understandings of the South China Sea conflict and how we see China evolving and different countries changing their approach. The Chinese understand one language, and it's not Mandarin. It's force. If they have force, they will use it, and they will use it very crudely and aggressively to get what they want. And the only way to get them to back down is to stand up, is to have the force to check them, to assert your own positions and not be bullied and pushed around. So we see the Filipinos are working very, very hard now to build up their Coast Guard capabilities, their naval capabilities, so that they can't be pushed around anymore. And we see that's why the Vietnamese are militarizing their features so that they can't be pushed around. This is going to be a very clear trend that will continue as it is as long as the Chinese behave in this aggressive manner, which I believe they absolutely will continue to do so.
That kind of answers the question that I wanted to ask now. Why does China even come? Because it seems like what do they try to get out of this forum? They come here. I watched the conversation in which it was, I think it was Dr. Wu facing Bill Hayton and the retired Filipino judge Antonio Carpio. And he came here to represent China, and he just said our possessions are historically documented, and then did not brought any proof. It's just basically trust me, bro. Meanwhile, both Carpio and Hayton pretty much utterly massacred this claim. And on top of it, added the layer that UNCLOS and the law disregards history anyway. So what exactly was the point for him to come here and be pretty much humiliated in public? I was starting to wonder that. And then I read also a piece by Wen Sung, who said that the purges have actually neutered the PLAN quite a lot. So you talk about the language of force, but the truth is that they cannot take them by force right now. So what exactly is the point for China to come to this event and to just not budge and talk like this? Why do they even bother coming?
I think there are three general reasons why I see why they continue to engage, right? One is they want to put something out there, at least to try to contest the narrative. If all the other countries get together and they come to some agreement, that's not going to be in line with the Chinese view. And they want to make sure that, when this is covered in the media, when academics are engaging with this, when there's any discussion of these issues, that the Chinese position is there and that it appears to at least be contested, even though, there's a Hague tribunal stating very clearly that certain features, are within the Philippines EEZ and so on and so on. They want to at least muddy the waters and make it seem like there's some contestation. The second is, I think, you and I are not the audience for this. At one point in the dialogue, one of the Cambodian delegates turned to me and said, I kind of feel bad for the Chinese because everyone is just ganging up on them. And I think that's possibly a view that's shared by some other countries that are very skeptical of, particularly when Americans, Europeans, and, Filipinos are viewed as quite close to Americans. So when a lot of these US aligned nations are stating something, there are a lot of third countries out there, particularly in the global South, that are at least receptive to the fact that, maybe China's narrative isn't completely right, but then maybe the other side is also, a US-led position, and they'd like to engage with those countries. And it also gives them perhaps the belief that, as Benjamin said, maybe you can keep negotiating with China. You can keep seeing if, you won't provoke them too much. So this gives this image that China is maybe not so aggressive as it actually is. And then the third reason is quite simply for intelligence reasons. I mean, a lot of the people who show up to these conferences have, heavily linked with the Ministry of State Security and other arms of China's overseas intelligence. They do a lot of work to build profiles of the academics and the Track One officials who attend these from the different sides they're engaging with. They're looking for any kind of way that they can get some leverage over who they view as some of their enemies in this space. So there's also a large intelligence angle to this as well.
Well then, Sasha, I hope you were very careful about talking about your personal secrets when you were there. Benjamin, would you like also to tip in on this question?
No, I pretty much agreed with what Sasha said.
All right, in this case, let's move on to talk about Taiwan, since after all, this is the center of our topic. As you both mentioned, Taiwan also inherited claims from the administration of the Republic of China from a long time ago, and yet nobody ganged up on Taiwan as far as I could see. Yet Taiwan also has a very heavily fortified island there. I think you said it was even the most heavily defended island. So, what exactly was Taiwan's role at the conference, and why didn't it take in the face the kind of pushback that China took?
Let me just clarify quickly, right? Ituapa is not the most heavily fortified feature in the South China Sea, but it's the largest natural feature, right? So it's the largest that you could say is actually an island without, reclamation and all this stuff that China and other countries have done to build up, reefs and rocks into islands. But it's certainly not the most fortified. It's quite outdated in terms of the infrastructure that's there now compared to what the Chinese have put on their features. This reflects the fact that Taiwan has spent a lot less time contesting and claiming these very expansionist legacy claims of the ROC in the past few decades under DPP administrations. It's still not, I think, quite where Taiwan should be in discourse wise. I think they do spend a little too much time protesting the Philippines when they should be working more with the Philippines. In particular, in response to China's recent announcement of a nature reserve, Taiwan's protest was to say that these are integral parts of Taiwan, which is not an effective message to send the Philippines. I would argue that it's been much more effective if Taiwan adopted the same approach it has to the Senkaku Islands or Diaoyutai, where it hasn't renounced the claim, but it's toned down a lot of the rhetoric and has a very good functional relationship with Japanese, particularly in level of Coast Guard cooperation, to prevent China from being too aggressive in that area. So in terms of how the Taiwanese were treated in the Manila Dialogue, I think it's a reflection of that shift, right? Maybe if this dialogue were held 15 years ago, there would also be ganging up on Taiwan, which, under the Ma Ying-jeou administration had protested the Hague Tribunal ruling in the favor of the Philippines, right? So I think people were happy to see Taiwan there. You sensed that a lot of people really started to understand that Taiwan's security situation is very linked with that of the South China Sea, and that both Taiwan, the Philippines, Taiwan, and other countries are facing very similar challenges when it comes to PRC aggression. So people were very curious to engage with Taiwanese, engage with researchers from Taiwan, and to see what lessons can be shared in countering China's aggression, and particularly a lot of its gray zone actions.
Julian, I'll add some element about that. So you mentioned at the very beginning of your question this notion of fortified island, and it's interesting to know that Pratas and Ituaba have actually been demilitarized and given to the Coast Guard to maintain and protect. So that was quite a bold move done by Taiwan when they did so, and there's only two countries that are really conducting land reclamation at a significant scale and militarizing, which are China and Vietnam. And but those are very different. I just want to give the audience a sense of what is happening. China controls 7 features permanently with military installations in the Spratlys, and those have 3,000 meters runways and long-range anti-air missile, anti-ship missiles. Just Cross Reef alone has 35 radars and signal intelligence and electronic intelligence facilities. 35 for just one feature. If you compare what Vietnam is doing, I mean, what Taiwan is doing, we just said so, and what Vietnam is doing, to illustrate is yes, they have the biggest number of features under their control in the Spratlys. They have more than China plus Taiwan plus Malaysia plus the Philippines combined. But if you do a comparison, and there you really reveal some optical illusions in the South China Sea. Yes, Vietnam controls more features, but China controls much more surface, above water surface, even though entirely artificial in the Spratlys. I said that Cross Reef alone has 35 radars and intelligence facilities, but all of Vietnam features put together don't amount to just Cross Reef. The biggest feature the best equipped feature on the Vietnamese side is 2 air radar, 1 naval radar. So three structures. Fury Cross Reef is 35. Vietnam doesn't have long-range anti-air or anti-ship missiles, not at all. Vietnam currently doesn't have a single runway longer than 3,000 meters. One is being built, but not operational. The other one is 1.8 kilometers. So there's a very big difference. And yes, Vietnam has been doing some land reclamation. They have moved from 200 to 2,000 hectares of above water surface, but they are still 1/3 below China. And if you take the average feature under Vietnamese control, like Sen-K, even after they grown it by 10, they multiplied the surface by 10, it's still 10 times smaller than Fiery Cross Reef alone. So you see, it's important to take those things into account. So in terms of fortifications, I would think that the Wuchu, the Matsu, and the Kinmen are really the stronghold of Taiwan, the one that are still militarized.
All right, thank you, both of you, for clarifying this. Uh, as you know very well, I live in Kaohsiung, and I surprised my neighbor yesterday by telling them that technically, this island far away in the South China Sea is actually part of Kaohsiung. So this island is part of my neighborhood in theory. And my neighbor was horrified at the idea, what the hell are we doing there? Why do we even keep this island? He was very embarrassed by it. So I was a bit at odds as to what answer him. So what do you think Taiwan should do about this island, actually?
Well, this is a very interesting question, right? Because there are essentially two distinct questions when it comes to what Taiwan's approach to Ituapa or Taiping Dao should be, right? One is the legal political claim, which is inherently linked up with Taiwan's legacy ROC political claims, which is linked to the constitution of the ROC, which Taiwan has been unable to shed, and linked to a whole range of issues that if it moves on and moves a position on, that's viewed as so-called Taiwan independence and would be viewed as casus belli for an invasion, right? So we see Taiwan doesn't want to officially give up, the ROC claims anywhere. Although, there has been the reforms in the 90s, so there's, no longer the intention to so-called reconquer the mainland. There's recognition of Outer Mongolia. Taiping Dao is just sort of, kept its place in history as an accident of history that happens to be outside of the territory of Taiwan, but is controlled by the ROC, much like Jinmen and Mazu are. The difference, of course, is that Jinmen and Mazu have people, and Taiping is not naturally populated. So then it becomes really a military question, which is the second question here, which is what should Taiwan do strategically about it? I think we all know it's not defensible. There's simply no way that if China tried to seize Taiping, or if it tried to blockade it and coerce Taiwan to give it up, it would not be defendable. So there's a lot of interesting questions about where that leaves Taiwan's global communication about this island and what it's worth. If it puts up a very big fight for Taiping, or in the event of a contingency around there, it can lead to views globally that this is somehow strategically significant if it loses Taiping Dao, and that there could be some calamitizing about Taiwan. It also can create some conflicts with the Philippines. If Taiwan is too aggressive in trying to defend its claims to Ituapa, that's going to put a lot of barriers towards deepening security cooperation with the Philippines. And as important as opposing China in the South China Sea is, the fundamentally most important reason for Taiwan to cooperate with the Philippines and security is because in the event of a Taiwan contingency, the defense of Taiwan's main island, it requires a heavy U.S. military presence fighting from northern Luzon, right? And in breaking a blockade, if a blockade is to happen, it requires convoys to pass through Filipino territorial seas and possibly way stations right within the Philippines. So these are the issues that really, really matter. And the Taiwanese should think about when they're devising a strategic posture in the South China Sea and in terms of strategic communication, what should be emphasized? Should Taiping be something quickly to be given up and explain that this is not important, it's an accident of history, and it's not what really matters about Taiwan? Or is it going to be a place where Taiwan makes a very big stand to try to oppose aggression by the PRC should that happen? And I would add one thing also to note that is there's a big difference about Taiping and also with Jinmen and Mazu in that regard when it comes to Taiwan's military situation, which is that these are not covered by the Taiwan Relations Act. And they've never been covered by even the ROC U.S. Mutual Defense Treaty that existed from the 1950s to the 1970s. The US has been very clear they're not going to defend these outlying islands of Taiwan militarily. So this is a situation where Taiwan is on its own. And I think we all know that Taiwan on its own is not able to hold off against the PRC. So this factors very heavily into strategic considerations.
Yeah, on my side, I published a paper with the Korea Institute of Maritime Strategy where I give some alternative scenarios for a non-lethal invasion of Taiwan, where I say I don't believe in the scenarios of the CSIS MTI or CSIS China powers where they talk about having this blockade or embargo or even a landmine field around Taiwan. In terms of size, to me, at least it doesn't make sense. But the same thing at a much smaller scale would make perfect sense if China wanted to build up an airtight blockade around the Kinmen, the Wuchu, and the Matsu, and they just wait until the islands run out of water, food, or electricity, whatever comes first, and then they just seize it without a fight, not a single fire shot. And that, if it works, and that they replicate it in the South China Sea with Pratas and Ituaba, and later with the Pescadores, then there's not even a need to invade Taiwan. Taiwan falls. So that's a very important and concerning situation that they're facing. And we hear about those, oh yeah, the China is going to invade in 2027. I don't believe it. For me, the earliest they could do it with a real chance of winning would be 2035, if they really wanted to go in full force with amphibious assault and so on, which I don't believe they would do. They so in the meantime, that's why they are using what they call the three wars: political warfare, social warfare, communication warfare, in order to prepare the field for what's coming. And but even today, you probably heard I mean, some journalists or some research center asked questions to the population of Kinmen, who said, "We don't want a war. We're almost ready. Well, psychologically, we're ready to get back with the mainland." So there's plenty of challenges facing the authorities. It's clearly not an easy game to play. And in regards to what you said and what Sasha said on the claims in the South China Sea, I think it's been a long time that Taiwan stopped fantasizing about or fencing the idea of taking back between brackets, taking back the features in the Spratlys and so on. But they cannot say it. They cannot say it out loud because otherwise it would break the status quo with China, and it would give even more excuses for China to invade it.
I need to push back on a couple of things Benjamin said. So I agree broadly with several points, right? I agree also. I think it's unlikely China's aiming for a blockade or quarantine scenario against Taiwan. I think it's unlikely anything happens before around 2035. But it is completely different in terms of which islands China is trying to take. I think perhaps it is true they would do a blockade or something in Taiping or Pratas. They're easily able to do it, and there's nothing Taiwan can really do about it. They'll wait for them to run out of resources, and they'll have to give up those islands in the South China Sea. Those would happen first. This is not something that would happen after, say, going for Jinmen or Matsu. And part of that is they were never going to go for Jinmen and Matsu. They would like nothing more than for Taiwan to keep controlling Jinmen and Matsu. As sort of you've indicated, these are areas that don't identify with Taiwan. They're historically not part of Taiwan. They were not colonized by Japan. They don't have the history that the Taiwanese nation has, and they've never identified with it. We see that in demographic surveys, political surveys. We see that in the character and nature of the population in Jinmen and Matsu. China understands this very well, and they're very happy to have Taiwan keep controlling this. This keeps alive this myth of one China, right? These are the areas that are outside Taiwan province, so-called, in the ROC, and it links Taiwan with the greater China that the Chinese believe in, and that certain blue elements in Taiwan also believe in. In one interview in the 1970s, I believe Mao Zedong was interviewed by Edgar Snow, the American leftist journalist, and he made it very clear that he wanted Chiang Kai-shek to keep controlling Jinmen and Matsu. And in fact, he said that if Chiang Kai-shek is unable to resupply, if he's unable to resupply those islands, we'll help them resupply it. We want to keep them in control there. So yeah, there's no chance. There's no chance that there's some sort of preemptive move on Jinmen and Matsu. The Taiwanese independence activists will celebrate if Jimin and Matsu are taken. There's no scenario where China just goes for Jimin and Matsu. What they're going for is the whole package. They want Taiwan Islands. They want the country, the people of Taiwan. They want to control that and incorporate that into their empire. So all these things are sideshows when it comes to Taiping, Jimin, Matsu. And we're going to want to think about those places individually in terms of their own logics. And the tactics they're going to use in a place like Taiping are going to be very different than a DD style invasion that you would see in Taiwan should that come to pass. So I think we do need to while we do need to think about how the Taiwan Strait is very linked with the security tensions that other countries face in the South China Sea, China's approach to Taiwan and the islands it controls are quite different when it comes to how they look at mainland Taiwan versus Taiping Dao and Dongsha as well in the South China Sea.
Actually, I'd like to ask one last thing to Benjamin, because I saw that during the conference, Sasha actually asked a question to panelists and mentioned that perhaps we should see all of China's claims as one, not only the South China Sea, but claims on Taiwan, claims on India, Himalaya, etc. So what would be your answer to this question?
I agree with that. I currently sent for publication a paper where I say that already in 1933, China didn't just claim the parasols. In 1933, China published a map of national shame. This is the title that they give it, which encompassed territories as far as Borneo and Siberia and Myanmar and part of Thailand and so on. It's a very, very ballooned claim level of claims. So they didn't wait for 1949 or the 1970s or the 1980s to claim. And it was the Kuomintang first, way before the Communist Party of China who did so. So they try to mix this with their legitimate quest to whitewash a famous century of humiliation, but the vast majority of these claims are totally imaginary and are not grounded in reality. I mean, when they say, "Oh, we have lost Siberia," no, there was not a single Chinese person living there. There was not a single administrative building there. There was no economic activity there conducted by Chinese people. It was really relations of suzerainty, like really just like in Middle Age. So they are mixing a number of things, and they seem to have trouble getting out of it. But to get back to the one unified claim, what you see that since 1949, China has taken back territories from every single one of its ground neighbors. So from the Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, even from Russia, from North Korea, from Vietnam, and so on and so forth. And now they are just replicating the same thing at sea. But for much too long, researchers and analysts have been analyzing separately the South China Sea, the East China Sea, the Yellow Sea, the Taiwan Strait. And let's say, yes, indeed, the adversary is different in each of these areas, but the one actor that is always the same is China. And its local actors and the Chinese Navy, the Chinese Coast Guard, the Chinese Maritime Militia are always there in each of these areas. So in my paper, I came on to say that for me, these are four theaters of a united front.
I could not agree more.
All right, Sasha and Benjamin, thank you so much for giving us your insights on Manila Dialogue, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Another topic we will talk about today is rare earth. There is no shortage of commentary on rare earth from academic or journalistic perspectives, so I went to speak with business analysts. The firm NorthStar Insights is a consultancy. Let's hear what its experts have to say on the matter.
My name is Wesley Romain. So I'm currently an analyst, East Asia analyst at NorthStar Insights. So I'm focusing on China, Hong Kong, SAR, and Taiwan. So I have experience living in Taiwan and also in the Philippines. So I have expertise also on geopolitics and risk and intelligence as well.
Wesley Romain contributed to a report on rare earth, and his first recommendation for tackling the challenge is for governments to support businesses, especially small and medium enterprises.
So I made a few recommendations. So how countries like could mitigate their risk to dependence on like critical minerals. The first answer will be like diversifying their supply sources. This is most of the countries, like in fact, due to the current geopolitical tensions, they will seek to have partnerships with countries that they feel safe, and in order to have like lessen like their reliance on China. So, well, in the case of Taiwan, so in fact, Taiwan is highly dependent on critical minerals. So, since like any, let's say, disruption in global trade, it will have a major impact on its high-tech manufacturing industries. So, and in fact, let's say more specifically, like in the South China Seas, or if there is any like sanctions from, let's say, China, or because China is the main um, provider of critical minerals, it could affect its the supply chains. So the local government, so they should like they could invest and support like SMEs and critical industries to help them adapt to any supply chain disruptions. I will say that for sure, it will be to invest financially. So, from my understanding, like the government, the current administration, lighting the administration, they plan to invest 10 billion NTD. So for SMEs, first to SMEs and also for most major companies, and also perhaps to assist them in when they seek, especially for SMEs who have very less leverage, like possibility to let's say not communicate, but to build partnership with foreign companies or the foreign companies. It will like government assist them. So this is one that's one aspect way to see it.
Wesley is not the only one who contributed to the report.
My name is Soojin Jang as a team of NorthStar Insights, and I'm currently work as a East Asia Pacific analyst. So my special area is about cybersecurity and AI governance, also geopolitical risk between two Korea, South Korea and North Korea, and Japan and China as well. So last month, our NorthStar Insight, we made critical mineral report, especially focused on East Asia and also African region, because nowadays the critical mineral is a significant security issue and economic policies as well. So our team also focused about how critical minerals can shape our security and global political marketing reason. So they have become strategic assets that connect climate change and technology with national security.
Soojin Jang shares her own insights on how businesses can be assisted in dealing with the geopolitical challenges surrounding rare earth.
I think from my perspective, I would say the example about South Korea, because I think South Korea and Taiwan have similar structure, especially about semiconductor. Because I think Taiwan could be a crucial role about semiconductor and crucial mineral competition between the US and China, but still Taiwanese industry and semiconductors market was highly depend on export. So I think Taiwanese government could support startup technology as well. and investment other ASEAN or other emerging countries. But still we have limitation because China's digital Silk Road initiative also have highly impacted the emerging countries. But I think Taiwan also could make a kind of potential opportunity to emerging countries using Taiwanese very highly technical and semiconductor market inside. Regarding the critical minerals, I think the critical mineral block between the US and China is getting really serious. And last time, the US and Australia, there was a certain cooperation to secure their critical mineral technology. In the short time, at the currently, China still have a strong influence about critical minerals, but in the future, if the collective cooperation and the global initiatives getting more broad, I think another block about critical minerals regarding UN or ASEAN countries could make a more broader critical mineral supply chain block.
But one of the most striking parts of the work by Wesley and Soojin is their recommendation that recycling can play a key role.
That's one thing. The second recommendation, it will be for Taiwan it will be to promote recycling. So as we know, like the Taiwanese industry is like increasingly focused on recycling critical minerals from existing materials and industrial waste. So I found that the Taiwan Environmental Protection Administration, which is the Xinjiang Huanting Pahushu, is trying to promote a more sustainable use of precious metals. So in order to improve infrastructure necessary for the recycling and reuse in manufacturing. As you know, in Taiwan, there is this debate about recycling nuclear waste, and this apparently there appears to be a sort of division among the people. So regarding recycling critical minerals, I think this is something that still has to be um, so far, it might be a bit too early to assess whether it's working, but I believe Taiwan doesn't have much, let's say, choice. They have to try implement because they have a very unique situation.
So I think I can support some Wesley's insight. So regarding the recycling, this is a hot issue about critical mineral nowadays. So we can also see the example about Japan. So Japan is also working hard about to secure a stable supply chain for critical minerals and while reducing resilience in China. Also, Japan also considered about the recycling technology related to critical minerals. So Japan's most creative approach is developing what is called urban mining. So urban mining is collecting rare earths and valuable materials from discarded electronics. So this approach not only strengthens resource security, but also supports Japan's move toward a greener and more sustainable economy. Because the COP conference finished, so the climate change and clean energy also kind of our global agendas. So regard to follow this trend, I think Japanese example could be a good example for to Taiwan.
The Taiwan is also trying to go towards green energy. So this issue is also very important for them, like the critical minerals, because in fact, green economy relies on dependence on rare earths, lithium, cobalt, nickel.
They also warn, however, that de-risking the rare earth supply chain can have adverse effects. It is not a miracle solution to prevent conflict. the interconnected nature of supply chains can actually serve as a deterrent, and if economies share no links, there's one less incentive to maintain peace.
I just want to question the fact also we discuss a lot about like countries or companies be less dependent from each other to diversify, but we could also question it in a broader way whether being less dependent, it could also imply perhaps higher risk of conflictuality, especially in the region, like in the South China Sea, in East Asia. There are a lot of, let's say, underlying tensions. And so if every countries, China and the US and the other regional countries, they want to go to be less dependent, let's say from China, it could also mean that might have like higher risk of conflictuality, because if you have nothing to lose at the end, so on other issues where we could also think that it could lead to some form of increased tensions.
I think we still need to be really calculated and also consider the future geopolitical risk as well, because the Trump administration, they have really strong uncertainties. Even though the relationship between Japan and US and South Korea and US, we still have, even though we have alliance, but we still have uncertainty. So if regarding to Taiwan, US and China, the supply chain of critical minerals, I think we also need to keep considering their highly changing policies trend as well.
On other topics in the news around the world and about Taiwan, Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi told the Japanese parliament that a Chinese attack on Taiwan would be seen by Japan as enough of a threat to cause it to engage militarily. A Chinese diplomat in Japan reacted by posting on social media with a barely veiled threat hinting at having her head cut off. Extensive coverage worldwide strangely put the blame on Mrs. Takaichi for causing the stir. The British newspaper The Guardian asserts that analysts observed a shift in Beijing's approach to Taiwan, and that recent statements from China mean it is adopting a longer-term strategy to assert pressure over the country. Finally, Taiwanese Vice President Xiao Bi-Kim has addressed the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China during a visit to Europe. The meeting was noted for taking place in the Brussels building of the European Parliament. We will meet again next week to discuss maybe some of these topics. Until then, keep in touch and talk to you soon.